Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.
My first experience was my grandma buying me the Obi-Wan Kenobi Kenner figure. And I had no idea really who it was, so I just thought she'd bought me a figure of an old man. I was like, that's great, thanks, man.
Our guest today is a New York Times bestselling author whose work includes novels, TV, comic books, and award-winning audio dramas. If there's a well-known, well-liked geek property, he's probably worked on it. Here's just some of the sandboxes he's gotten to play in: Batman, Doctor Who, Assassin's Creed, Pacific Rim, Transformers, Back to the Future, Star Trek, and much more. But it's his work on the galaxy far, far away that brings him here today. He wrote the audio drama Star Wars Dooku Jedi Lost, as well as Tales from Vader's Castle. He's also a major contributor to the transmedia sensation Star Wars The High Republic. He's written the ongoing Marvel comics as well as several novels, including the second in the series, The Rising Storm. Let's give a warm hello there to Cavan Scott.
Hello there. You've taken my line. I mean, obviously, as British, I have to start every conversation with hello there. It's just the law.
It is the law.
You can use it as a rejoinder, too, I think. I mean, I think a lot of people would be like, well, the rejoinder is General Kenobi. But I think hello there can match hello there.
Yeah, okay then. Then we'll be in a loop and we just will never get out of it, and we'll all just be saying hello there to each other. This will go on for hours. Everyone will tune out. It'll be terrible.
That would be a good meme, is 3 Obi-Wans pointing at each other going, hello there.
Yeah, okay. I'll take that, yeah.
Okay, so we start with 5 with the Force. This is just 5 basic questions we ask all our guests just to get kind of your Star Wars fandom baseline. And question number 1 is, which Star Wars movie is your go-to favorite?
Return of the Jedi, always, because it's Return of the Jedi, and it's the one that for years I used to say Empire was my favorite, and let's face it, Empire is amazing. But actually, when I thought about it, I was like, yeah, but the one I watch all the time, and the one I think about, and the one that catapulted me from a fan into being nuts about Star Wars was Return of the Jedi, because I was just the right age, and there were Ewoks in it.
Yes. I feel very passionately about that myself.
Yeah.
You said it was the one that kind of catapulted you into the fandom. Is it because of the Ewoks, or is there anything particular you can point to that went, oh, this is the conversion point?
Well, I think Empire is the first one I saw in the cinema, but Return of the Jedi was, I mean, Jabba's palace, just that. In fact, I love monsters, and so that opener has so many monsters and the Rancor. And then it just doesn't stop. And Luke is wearing his coolest costume ever. And there's just one thing after another. And it's got Jabba the Hutt in it. And yeah, so it's just it's pure nostalgia now when I look back. But at the time, it blew Star Wars open in a way that we hadn't really seen before. It was like suddenly the galaxy just seemed so much bigger, and the Emperor and everything. It was just like, yeah, for me, it's the perfect storm of just everything coming in and blowing my mind.
Awesome. Now, question number 2, I need a 1d6, which I somehow lost my 1d6. I was just playing with it.
Pick a number between 1 and 6.
Yeah, pick a number between 1 and 6.
Me, 6. Let's go 6.
Okay, great. What is your favorite Star Wars alien?
Thorians, because Hammerhead was one of the first figures I got. So, and because they are just so bonkers, and they're just, and from everything from the voice box through to the way they look. Yeah, Thorians, I love them. And Ewoks. just to, but I think the one I think of is the Thorians.
That's cool. What is your favorite line to quote?
Other than hello there.
We already established that, maybe?
I think I've answered that already, haven't I, really? So yeah, it's always going to be hello there. I use it every day without fail.
Now, do you think about Star Wars every time you use it? Are you like, this guy doesn't know I'm using a Star Wars phrase? Or
everyone who knows me knows I'm using a Star Wars thing. It's just The other ththing I will try and get into every conversation is laugh it up, fuzzball. And sometimes that's more, in things like funerals, it's quite hard, but I will try, I'll give it a go.
Some people appreciate that.
Can you do any Star Wars impressions or impersonations?
I don't know if I can, other than Obi-Wan. Difficult that is. No, I can't. I think I'm just pretty
good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was pretty good. You got the right amount of Grover to Burt in there.
Yeah.
And the final question with 5 with the Force, besides the movies, what is your favorite Star Wars content? This could be a TV show, a comic book, a novel, a game.
I would think, that's really hard.
I was going to say, you've worked on probably all of those.
Well, yeah, but so Republic, the original Dark Horse comic, was probably the thing I go back to all the time, and I reread it regularly. That and Knights of the Old Republic, the comic. Yeah, that was my Clone Wars Republic. So yeah, it's always there for me, and it's the best Ventress, pretty much.
Yeah, when you approached, we'll get into your Star Wars journey, but right now we're at this point where I have to ask this question. When you approached High Republic, did anything from your past readings of the Republic kind of inform you or inspire you, or did you think about any of that, or were you just like, nope, this is kind of a whole new era, let's start on paper?
No, absolutely inspired me, because there's been at the time, and I think hopefully people have got over this now, there was a lot of people saying, oh, this is replacing the Old Republic, and obviously it's not, because it's a new era.
Yeah.
But looking back to those times where the Jedi at their height, the old Republic and the run from Dark Horse, that's what I immediately thought of. But yeah, Republic itself, a lot of the internal strife of the Jedi that I think of comes from those sort of like early Clone War issues, say before the Clone Wars that we now know really came to be.
Yeah.
And so I think the way I write the Jedi is definitely influenced by that Dark Horse run. And a lot of the way I sort of plan out the arcs and everything is definitely, it's there in the back of my mind. I'll say it's a series I go back and read regularly. So yeah, I think it was always going to have an influence on me. And I know Old Republic in general had an influence in the writer's room when we started the High Republic. It was something we mentioned a lot, just because we were all fans of it. So it was, again, not trying to replace it, but it was there. It was like, it was those are the giants of the shoulders we're standing on, so it was always there in the back of my mind.
Absolutely. That's it's really interesting how stories evolve and change hands and keep evolving, even if it's all within the same world. And I know the Dark Horse Republic is not part of the same canon as the Disney era and High Republic. But
really
in a way,
don't care about that.
Yeah.
It's all Star Wars. I mean, I come to this from a storytelling point of view, but also as my other big fandom in life is Doctor Who, which was mentioned earlier on. And Doctor Who has no canon. It can't have a canon. It's just impossible. I mean, I was part of a team that wrote the definitive history of the Daleks. The problem with that is they have 3 origin stories within canon. And so our job was to make sure they all fit, and we sort of managed it. But because time travel. But
yes,
growing up, I had no idea what canon was in that series. I had no idea what canon was in anything. Again, I'm a comics fan. Comics, continuity is constantly changing and twisting. And part of the fun is trying to work out what you still want to believe and what you don't. And as I'm very much of a mind that, while I'm working in something, I will make sure it fits within whatever the established canon is of that time. But I don't really care if something from the past is canon or not, because for me, it's just still Star Wars or Doctor Who or Marvel or DC or whatever. Something pre-crisis for DC is just as important to me as something that's post-crisis or the New 52 or whatever, because it's about the characters and it's about the stories. And that's all I care about, really. As I said, I will work within the boundaries of whatever canon is being held at the time. But because of the kind of work I do, that's always shifting anyway. And I always love those moments, again, thinking about other franchises, like in the Star Trek comics that DC did, when suddenly they had to rewind everything because they realized that the Enterprise crew was still on Vulcan in Star Trek 4, whereas they'd had an entire run when they were on the Excelsior and they were having breakdowns and Spock was there and Spock knew who he was and there was a Klingon and suddenly they had to go, perhaps we'll go back to Vulcan where there's another bird of prey. And so I love those moments when people have to sort of scrabble and work out what to do. It's one of the reasons I do what I do for an employee, for work, because my brain loves working out how it all works.
Yeah.
So yeah, I have a very loose sense of what canon should be or could be, and whether it's important or not.
It's almost emblematic of real life stories that are passed down through generations or within cultures and kind of morph and change based off of who the storyteller is in that given moment, or, how those are being shared. I kind of like that perspective when approaching works like Star Wars or Doctor Who or Star Trek, these big universes where all of the above is probably true in some form or fashion, and you get to be the architect of that. That's pretty neat.
Yeah, and your favorite story is still there. I think that's the most important thing. It's like when people say to me about when films are rebooted or sequels remade and that kind of thing, it doesn't take away that original film. It doesn't take away, unless they come into your house to take all the copies and burn them. They still exist, and they exist for you, and they're still important for you. And yeah, absolutely. I can see why you might want to have more stories within that timeline or whatever. I get that as well, but they still mean the same for you, no matter if they're canon at that point or not. And so I don't know, it's complicated, and I know people invest in stuff, and I get it. I really do get it, and I have the same moments when I go, oh God, no, and then my brain just goes, but there's still that doesn't matter. It's still the thing I love. So yeah.
So let's go back to the start of your Star Wars journey. How were you first introduced to Star Wars, and can you take us through that experience?
I mean, it was comics. So I was a little bit too young and probably a bit nervous as a kid to watch the original Star Wars. I bet my parents, they'd seen me not cope with the Incredible Hulk. They weren't going to take me through something like Star Wars. So
did you make David Banner anger? You don't make David Banner anger.
No, I was terrible. That theme tune came in, beautiful as it was, and I was out of the room. So they had to cope with this anyway. See, and I love horror so much, and I love these things. It's just a miracle, because at the time I was such a nervous child. So I missed the movie. My first experience was my grandma buying me the Obi-Wan Kenobi Kenner figure. And I had no idea really who it was, so I just thought she'd bought me a figure of an old man. I was like, that's great, thanks, man. And then I discovered the comics. So the original Marvel run, which was reprinted over here in the UK in Star Wars Weekly. So they literally every week they print 10 pages of whatever, the issue, cut it, just like bang, whatever that 10 page, dong, gone. And then the backup script would be something like Star-Lord or whatever that was remotely, that's what Marvel did over here. Transformers had Machine Man at the end of it. It was whatever they could ram in their sort of back catalogue in the back of a license, they did. So I picked up those comics, and I think I got a bundle of them in a jumble sale, and then went out and found them on the newsstand. And that was my introduction. So it was the first ever original story after the adaptation for Marvel. So yes, anyone who knows me, it's the one that introduced Jackson.
Yep.
And I read Jackson before I met Luke Skywalker. There you go. That explains a lot.
And it also kind of explains why aliens, or it highlights how you're attracted to the aliens first, in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And also that's wound up in everything that I love outside of Star Wars as well. So, but yeah, so the comics were there. And then, the build up to Empire, I think that's when I was getting really excited. So Empire was the first one I saw in the cinema. But yeah, it was the Marvel comics right from the off. They were my introduction.
What were the other things, like once you saw Return of the Jedi and your brain just went, okay, Star Wars is a big deal for me. What were some of the ways you interacted with Star Wars on your day-to-day basis? Again,
the comics continued, because obviously that run continued. The Ewoks cartoon I have on my wall, you can't see it. There's a cell of Wicket over there because
oh, sweet,
because I love that cartoon so much. It was the world building and the weirdness of it. The toys obviously were a massive part of it, and just general that thing of it was impossible not to interact with it. It was just everywhere. Every playground in the country was people acting out the scenes or coming up with new stuff. So yeah, it was just the right time. And yeah, the cartoons were a massive part. I was a massive animation fan, and just to have the Ewoks there, and there was a British Ewok reprint comic and all that kind of thing. So it was just everywhere. It was everywhere. And yeah, and again, seeing Jabba's palace and then seeing all the figures that came out of that and everything.
Yeah,
that was it. It was just part and going back and finding the stuff I missed. So it all just became what everyone does in fandom. You get that little moment, and then you dive in and go, oh, so
Now, as you grew, there's kind of two paths I think people take. One is they reach like 12 or 13. Maybe that's even a little old. Since this is the path I did not take, I'm not exactly sure where the age range is, but where they kind of put away their toys for a bit. And then as they grow older, they kind of look back and find that nostalgia and want to rediscover it. And then there's people who never put their toys away, and it's always the flag they wave. Which version were you? And if you were the latter, did it take you through the dark times like before, between 85 and 92 when the Thrawn novels came out?
Put away your toys. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, exactly.
I never put away anything. So I was a nerd and happy to announce it to the world all times, and everyone knew I was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the time when, before the geeks won, so I spent a lot of time being beaten up because I loved this stuff. I was completely, it was geek out and proud. It was, it was, there was no two ways about it. And I remember every birthday, my mum and dad saying to me, and now this will probably be the last toy we buy you because you should have thrown out of these by now.
Like a sly ever told.
Yeah. And so, and the next time I'll be, asking for something else. So I never, it was always there. As for the dark times, I remember going into a comic shop and seeing, so my local comic shop here in Bristol in the UK, which Forever People it's called, and going in and seeing the Dark Empire series.
Yes.
With an amazing 2000 AD artist on the front cover drawing Luke. And I couldn't quite believe that I was seeing Star Wars again, in something new. And then I think a week later, I walked into a bookshop and saw Tim's novel, Tim Zorn's first novel. And so I was just like, oh, it's back. And so for that point, it never really went away. And the funny thing is, both my big two fandoms, like Star Wars and Doctor Who, went through the same things. So late 80s, Doctor Who was cancelled and had the wilderness years of toys and books and comics and all these different things. So the two, I just seemed to think, by that point, I thought it was normal that things went away on TV or movies and would end up in books or in our case audio dramas and toys and things like that, and fanzines and the entire sort of fan creation community as well. So it just seemed a very normal thing to me that this would happen.
How did you tell your own stories when you were a kid? Were you a writer that would like jot down stories, or did you tell your stories through action figures, through pure imagination? What was kind of like your canvas for telling stories about the world you love?
I suppose it would be what you now call fan fiction. And I used to,
very cool.
crowbar into everything I was doing. So I used to quite often get told off in school that a creative writing story set in the Roman Empire would end with either stormtroopers or Daleks or something. But so at the time, I was massively into sort of fanzines and in all different fandoms, but especially Doctor Who and Star Wars. And so there is some stuff out there that I hope no one ever sees again, but I used to write dreadful bits of fan fiction and send them off and get them sent back, and they'd appear in a fanzine. So that was definitely my way into it. Or making up characters. I used to have exercise books made up of original creations of Transformers or Jedi or Time Lords or whatever. That always seemed to be a part of what I did, more so than just telling the stories. I would be creating new pockets of that fandom to try and sort of stamp my own sort of and then write things that, I'd create a superhero and have it interacting with Spider-Man or whatever, So across all the different fandoms I love, and definitely with Star Wars as well, that was a huge part of it. And now, of course, we do know it's fan fiction, but that wasn't a thing then. But it was just what a lot of us did. So that was definitely my way into creating. And from doing fanzines, I got a job as a pro journalist on a magazine, and so it's that you can absolutely see the path coming from fandom through to pro work.
That's remarkable. I'm curious because you've been able to work on so many different platforms for storytelling, comics, the audio dramas, the novels. And I think I'm curious, what are some of the differences in the ways that you approach creating for each?
On this creating a story, there is no real difference, whatever the medium. The difference is what you can do within that medium and the rules of the different worlds. So, and by worlds, I mean like there's things you can do in comics that you can't do in novels and vice versa. And again, with audio, it's audio is a huge part of our culture still over here. In the UK, audio dramas are still massive. We still have one of the biggest soap operas is on radio every day and has been for the last 75 years. And so I grew up with audio drama, and my first real job professionally writing fiction was for Doctor Who, and it was for audio drama back in 2000. So that's where I feel I sort of like, I'd learned how to do it, which is why I'm really happy to be back doing that within Star Wars, and seeing that audio drama has come back in a major way thanks to things like Audible and podcasts, and continues to grow. So creating the story is the same no matter what you're working on, but then it's knowing the limitations and the strengths of each different medium, and knowing how much you can cram into an issue of a comic or how much you shouldn't cram into an issue. Knowing in audio drama how to write it in a way so you're not saying, look at that spaceship, which is shaped like a rocket over there, and all those kind of things. So it's, it's just learning the different tricks of the trade for each. But the basic storytelling is the same because it's still character at the end of it. The beginning is always the same. You obviously create knowing what medium you're working in usually. But yeah, that's when you start getting into the technicalities, I suppose, of writing for a different form.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the High Republic, and there may be spoilers for Up to the Rising Storm, and if there's spoilers beyond that, that's okay. Just so you know, I've only read Up to the Rising Storm so far. I've been slow to get on board, but a lot of people recommended it. And as my first question, how would you pitch the High Republic to fans of Star Wars who haven't gotten into it yet?
Okay. So the High Republic came out of a desire to tell storytelling in that golden era of the Jedi that we hear about in Star Wars, we hear about in A New Hope. Because it's obvious that Obi-Wan's not talking about the prequels when he talks about, the Jedi being and an elegant ages and all the small civilizations. It wasn't a civilized age in the prequels. So when we got together to create what became the High Republic, it was that idea of telling something during that height. It soon became very obvious that just because the Jedi are at their height, that means, there has to still be a lot of bad things happening. Otherwise, you don't have drama. Yeah. So I think a lot of the time there was a lot of people going, but it'll be Star Wars about the war. And it was like, there was never going to be that because you need to, it was basically trying to tell a story of what it would feel like to be a Jedi at that time. A Jedi when there are thousands of, because we know what it's like through Luke to be a Jedi on their own. We know what it's like through the Clone Wars to be a Jedi that know, right at the end where, things have been going wrong for the Order. They're not feeling the Force so much anymore. There's suddenly all these battles they didn't think they were going to have. Yeah. They can almost feel the end coming. With the High Republic, it was telling a story of what it was like to go from a period where you knew you were part of a big, glorious Order, and then the world shifting underneath you a bit. So yeah, it's 200 years before the prequels. The Republic is on a massive expansion curve, trying to be the best it can be, rather than it being controlled by people who want it to be worse than it is. And in the middle of that, there's a massive threat to what it is to be a Jedi and what it is to be a member of the Republic. So that's really that was the idea behind it.
One of the things I found most surprising about the High Republic is really getting into the granular of the Force and how it works for each particular Jedi. And I find that really fascinating because one of the things is I've never felt so understanding of the Force. And what are some of the elements, as you approach representing the Jedi, what are some of the elements you knew you had to include to help bring, for lack of a better term, light to the Force?
Well, it's interesting because you don't want to explain too much. I mean, that's the thing. One thing and Star Wars is great in dropping breadcrumbs. I mean, again, that entire speech by Obi-Wan it's a masterclass in just dropping backstory and that you have no idea what it is. Now we all know what the Clone Wars is. And at the time, it was like, the what now? And it was, but it just felt right. It felt, it was just that little bit enough to make you go, I want to find out more. But at the same time, you don't want to explain everything. Again, the worst thing you could have done is for Obi-Wan, for so many reasons, to sit there and go, well, the Clone Wars, when? Right. And you want the bit of the mystery. You want to, if you're putting stuff in, you want to leave enough gaps or create new gaps that the mystery deepens. With the Force and the Jedi, one of the things we wanted to do right from the off on this initiative was, again, to look at what it means to be a Jedi from a personal point of view, because again, they're not in the same place as they are in the prequels. There had to be a difference, otherwise we'd just be writing the prequels again, and George did that very well. So, it's not, we don't just want to repeat that. And again, we thought that we have a slight freedom with the High Republic in the fact that if there are all these Jedis, and if they have lived through decades of peace, and actually they don't need to light their lightsabers, because no one in their right mind would go up against a Jedi when a Jedi walks in the room. And a Jedi doesn't have to be a warrior, because a Jedi will be they know that you don't want to take one on, but also they'll probably try and find a way around this anyway. It gave us a chance to really look at all the different characters, knowing that we were going to have so many different characters as well. And I don't think we really imagined there were going to be as many characters as there is, as the High Republic has grown. And we had that character encyclopedia last year, which just blows my mind that even exists with that many people in it. But we thought we can really explore, all the different, not just in the Force, but just what it means to be a Jedi from a point of view, when you're taken as a kid, when you're trained, when you're living out. For me personally, it was very important to see Jedi living outside temples. Or if they've got temples, that's why we came up with the outpost system. That there are Jedi living alongside people in the various areas or the various planets, and the temple's built from the material of the planet. It's not just looking like the temple back on Coruscant.
Yeah,
and so that was really important. And also, from a storytelling point of view, if they were all a bunch of Obi-Wans, or if they were all a bunch of Mace Windus, it would be so boring to write, let alone read. So we knew we had to give individuality and explore those different things, because like everything, and you're dealing with a religion at the end of the day, with the Jedi, everyone comes to religion in a different way. Whether you believe in the religion or not, everyone approaches it differently. And people who are within a religious group, some people are more devout, some people interpret it in certain ways. Some people have the little secrets they keep outside, of the church or whatever. And no two people sitting in a church congregation think about their religion in the same way. There's always an interpretation there. So we wanted to actually embody that in the Jedi at the time as well, given the Jedi time when they can explore, and they're allowed to explore, and they're not part of a monoculture that says there's only one way. There's still the code. There's still all those things that you expect a Jedi to be. But perhaps there's a little more nuance in how they can interpret that. And yes, there's an element of you're out in the Outer Rim, and what goes on the Outer Rim perhaps stays on the Outer Rim for certain people who've never been back to Coruscant since they were a youngling, So that's interesting to me. I mean, I've got, I did theology at university. One of the things I really specialized in was the Templar Knights. And you get all the legends about the Templar Knights, and you get all the conspiracy theories. There's loads of really interesting evidence that has come through the years of how those men back in those days, how they interpreted what their mission was, when they were out protecting people in their equivalent of the Outer Rim, So that really fed into my understanding of what the Jedi and what I wanted to explore for it. And I kept bringing it up in meetings, because obviously the Jedi in George's creation are based on samurai. You've got that entire samurai thing going on. But again, we thought, well, we can use that and explore, and there will be some Jedi who are more of that nature, and then there'll be some that will be exploring different ways. And so, that was it. It was always honoring what had gone before, but taking a step back and saying, well, what would it actually be like to be there? What would it feel like? Just because you've been trained for decades in a temple doesn't mean you're good at it. It doesn't mean you think you're good at it. It doesn't mean that you can't make mistakes. And again, mistakes make drama. And so that was the important thing.
I really like how each individual Jedi is their own person. I can tell the difference between Elzar Mann and Stellan Gios are. I can see how they're friends, but they're also very different people. And I think it enhances Star Wars for me in the sense of it brings it into this kind of very real world of people relating to people. And I think that's all great sci-fi is. It's just human stories told through the lens of science fiction. And I don't have a question here. I think I just have a statement that your Jedi are pretty amazing people. And the Clone War era, the Jedi are kind of pushed into a corner by the dark side. They're trying to figure out why the Force is acting the way it is and why everything's tinged by the dark side. So they're a little more uptight. And in the High Republic era, you do sense that freedom of we get to kind of explore our way with the Force and help people along as we go, as opposed to we're generals in an army.
Yeah, and for me, it was important. You mentioned Stellan and Elzar, and that was probably what I didn't. That was the journey I went on writing that book, because when I started the book, I don't think I really had worked out what their friendship actually was, and I sort of knew. I mean, they were new characters in a way at that point as well.
Yeah.
You know, I was exploring them as we went, and I thought it was very important for me to show that Jedi can have different views of the Force, but still get on incredibly well and be best friends. And one of a better word. Because we live in a world where people have forgotten how to have a different view from the next door neighbor, and again, I think through fiction, we learn the best way to be. And, that's one of the great things Star Wars could do. Star Wars is part, for me, a parable saying, if you don't talk to each other, bad things happen. And that's really simplifying. But, if you put barriers between yourself, the bad people win. And I'm being really simplistic here, but that's the general story of this saga. It's and they lay it out in whatever you think of Rise of Skywalker. There is the moment where it's thrown there on screen saying that's how they win, because they separate us, and that is exactly right through every Star Wars story. And so when we had the High Republic and we knew we were going to stress test all these Jedi, we wanted to show that some of the Jedi break. Some of the Jedi don't make it through. But the strongest Jedi, no matter what their differences are, come together. And so, again, I think that you couldn't have a better story at the moment. And again, from a storytelling point of view, you need those moments. We talked about comic books. You wouldn't want the Justice League to be made up of Superman. You wouldn't want the Avengers to be made up of Captain America. We love those characters, and those characters are. I mean, we talked about Stellan was our Superman. He was the Superman.
Oh, yes.
Captain America. He was the one who had principles and would stick to them no matter what.
Yeah.
Superman's one of my favorite comic characters because he's always good in a world that can be dark around him. But at the same time, you wouldn't want 5 Clarks fighting against each other. You need him to be up against Batman. Not up against Batman, but have Batman beside him. You need him to have Guy Gardner there. It's likewise in the Avengers. You need perhaps Wolverine. You need Hawkeye. You need all these different types, because then they're stronger as a group. We looked at a lot of the events that we saw in comic books and how they worked, and sort of went, well, how can we map that onto what we're doing, and how can we have those archetypes? And in the early days, there was that was our Wolverine Jedi, that was our Superman Jedi, that was our Batman Jedi. So that was very much part of before they started to form their own characters, we were using those sort of archetypes in the same way as you do with any story. You start thinking in the broadest way, and then you start narrowing it down. And then when you start narrowing it down, they become their own people. And I think that's what I found in The Rising Storm. When I went into it, it was very much, it was like Stellan was my Superman and Elzar was my Batman.
Yes.
But hopefully they became more than just being analogs for Clark Kent and Bruce Wayne. But that was how I went in, going, those are the kind of archetypes I need the story to be about.
Yeah.
And then it surprised me in the novel when certain things happened, because the characters have grown into their own people.
It's really, I've hardly said anything this hour because I've just so much enjoyed listening to how you kind of craft these stories, that kind of anthropomorphical study almost that that goes into these archetypes and building this world. I thought it was so fascinating when you brought up your theological studies background and how that was influencing kind of the world building in New Republic. But I'm kind of curious, what element from that, what element are you most proud of that you've contributed to this universe of Star Wars?
I think it's the reaction, I think, of people to it. I think that's the thing that's got me the most. Keeve Trennis, who is the lead character in the comic book. She's incredibly personal to me, even though she's not a middle-aged white British dude. Because when I was first at Skywalker Ranch with the other guys, which sounds like a humble brag, but I was absolutely bricking it. I was really, my imposter syndrome was off the scale. I was like, you have made a huge mistake. I should not be in this room with these people. And I walked out. I left the room. There was a point I was just, I need to go and get some air because I was panicking. We were getting to the point when we had to come up with ideas and share them to the group. And I looked around, and the other architects were like scribbling in their notepads. The editorial team were talking about stuff. Story was talking about stuff. And I was like, I have nothing here. So I walked out and I went for a walk, and Daniel Jose Older sort of like went, "You okay?" I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And just walked around the grounds of the Skywalker Sounds building, which are beautiful. Was like going, I'm going to have to go in there and say they need to send me home. And so from that, I was like, well, what would a Jedi do? You know, what would the Jedi do in that situation where they know they've been asked there for a reason? You know, there was a reason I'd been asked. They'd flown me from Britain to California. You know, there was a reason they spent that much money. They saw something in me for doing that. What would a Jedi feel who's standing up against all these heroes around her, or them? It wasn't a her at that point, and thought, I'm not good enough. You know, and so that was my way into what became the High Republic. It was the story of Keeve, who's a young Jedi, because again, these are universal stories. She didn't have to be a middle-aged white bloke. She, became a young black woman who was like at the point of being knighted, who didn't feel she could stand there alongside these people that there's a scene in the first comic when she meets Avar Kriss, who's one of our heroes. She just loses the ability to filter and just swears in her face. Just like, oh bleep, it's you. That's the kind of thing I felt I would do every minute of working on this. So to see that then to people, still to the day on Instagram or whatever, there are people discovering that character for the first time and going, that's me. And whether that's me from the way Ario designed her, and Phil Nota designed her, and ethnicity and everything, to the universal nature of feeling like you're not good enough.
Right.
It's amazing to have that. So many people come up to me and saying, Keeve is important to me because, and you hear those same things spoken back to you. So whatever happens, I know my part in all this is like one part of a massive Star Wars tapestry, this story that's been going on for 40 years plus. But I think that's the one I'm taking forward with me. Those moments when people turn up and say, that character means something to me because it reflects my own life.
What a beautiful, wonderful accomplishment that I would imagine is the envy of any artist out there to have.
It's incredible, and it's so humbling. And I can't really explain what it feels like. There's been moments like, so the first celebration we went to in Anaheim after the High Republic came out in the middle of the pandemic, we had no real idea. All we had was online noise either way. We went to that first celebration. We walked into the room, they put in our panel in, and we were like, you've put us in the wrong room. It's huge. It could seat 4,000 people. It's like, you have made a terrible mistake. But we had to go with it. It was too late. So we walked up and we had lights on us. We couldn't really see the audience. We could tell there was people out there, but we couldn't see. And we just thought they went by like the first sort of 5 rows.
Sure.
And we did the entire panel. And there was a sense of like, there's noise coming back here. People are enjoying this.
Yeah.
The lights went off at the end and we all stood there, and there's a shot of us all looking like dumbstruck because there was 4,000 people in that room and there were people standing at the back. And the fact that that's a book panel at that point, it was just books. There wasn't the Acolyte and whatever. It was still just the books and comics.
Yeah,
people came to that, and so we'd have people come up to us and say it got us through lockdown. People saying that people are now in relationships because they met and talked about the High Republic. We had parents coming up to us and say, and this is not just that. It's not saying, "Oh, look, great we are." This is what Star Wars is. This is the importance of Star Wars.
No, I understand.
Parents coming up and saying, "I gave me something to talk about with my kids where we couldn't actually communicate at the time." So it's those moments are always the things that matter. Because like any job, there are days when you never want to hear the word Star Wars. It's just like there are days when you're in the actual down the mine and you're working, you're chipping away, and there's cave-ins going on around you, and you all kinds of things going on. But you always think back to those moments. Those are the important moments, those connections and fandom. Because again, I say I came to all of these things through fandoms. And so the fandom is the most important part of this for me, because that's why we do it.
Yeah. That's a really great kind of summary of the effect of fandom and kind of the circular nature of your journey going from fandom to creator while still being a fan.
Yeah.
Let's jump to back to your personal Star Wars feelings. What are the top 3 elements that make Star Wars to you?
It's a really tough question. Adventure is right there from the off, because that's what it was for me when I first saw it. It was an amazing adventure, and yes, there were monsters. I think so. Adventure and monsters, that's 2 right there. The third one is probably family, and I mean that not so much in the found family of the story and the family dynamics of the story, but again, what we were just talking about. My kids and me and my wife have Star Wars as a family thing, so they came to it through Rebels. They were just the right age for Rey. So now, Rise of Skywalker, we were there in the cinema. My youngest wearing a Chewie onesie. It's part of what has made our family. It's part of the fabric. And again, my friends, my colleagues, are part that side of family as well is through things like Star Wars. So the adventure on the screen, the monsters that I love, and the family that surrounds it. I think that's probably Star Wars to me.
Love that.
That's fantastic. That is really fantastic. What era or aspect of Star Wars would you love to take on next? If you just were given a free reign or just hey, pitch us one, not pitch us. I know you're not allowed to pitch Star Wars, but what era would you like to take on?
There's part of me doesn't want to answer that question just in case they do say to me, "You've done the High Republic now." I mean, the end of the High Republic is there. It's in the horizon now. We've been working on it so long, but we're right in the last bits at the minute. So it's working out what we're going to be doing next. From a pure creator point of view, I think I've gone into the past. I'd love to go into the future now. I'd love to explore what's beyond Rise of Skywalker, and obviously we've got films and things that are coming that are doing that. But I think I'd love to explore new things. What's happened to those characters that we saw in the sequel trilogy next? How does that relate to what we've seen in the past? What new characters are coming from that era? What is it like to live in a post First Order galaxy? What does a galaxy that has had a republic, had the Empire, had a new republic that's gone wrong, how do they build? How do you get past that history repeating thing?
Yes.
I think that would be the area that if I could choose, and if they were listening, that's the bit I would love to. Actually, they know this because I bang on about it all the time. But it's pushing things forward. And I think I'm a massive fan of nostalgia because of, well, as you can see. But like with anything in other franchises, I love some of the stuff in Star Trek when they went back in the past. I'm more interested in knowing what's happened past Picard. Because I want to know where that galaxy is going, where all of these things are going. There has to be movement forward for all of these things to survive. You can't just keep going back to the past.
Yeah.
So, if I could choose, that's definitely where I'd hopefully see my future in Star Wars.
You see your future in Star Wars in the future of Star Wars. I think that's a great.
Exactly. I'd love to think I was there.
You talked about like your daughter being in a Chewie onesie. Going to see Return of the Jedi. Do you have one favorite Star Wars memory? And what is that?
It's really hard because again, there's so many, and there's been so many over the last few years, and they are wrapped up in they're so wrapped up in all of this. They're so wrapped up in like the cosplay moments, the cosplay meetups for the High Republic, seeing our characters, seeing people spend hours building a costume. But again, linking it to my family, I had celebration in London. The family came up, spent time, and Lucasfilm were great. They let sort of behind the scenes to see what was going on, so behind the stage of the Star Wars Live stage. And there was a moment where Anthony Carboni, who's from the Star Wars show, I've known Anthony for a long time now, and he was like, he greeted the kids like they were the biggest stars in the room. He was amazing. I don't think he'd noticed that my youngest was wearing a Star Wars show t-shirt that she got, that I brought back years back, because she, again, it was all part of her growing into Star Wars, was having the Star Wars show on YouTube and that kind of thing. And he was walking around the corner. He turned to me and went, "Don't freak out." And we walked into a room, and Billy Dee Williams is sitting there. And I internally freaked out. But I think it was quite cool and fashionable on the top. And then I turned to the girls and went, "Okay, Lando's in there. Just be cool." And seeing how cool they were as he went past, and he just basically did a Lando, "Hey," at them. And it was just like, every part of my life collapsed in on each other. So I think it's my two teenage daughters smiling at Lando and Lando going, "Hey." I think that's probably the moment I'm always going to love.
Oh, what a beautiful picture.
That's a great moment. And our final question, can you tell us, what does Star Wars mean to you?
Well, I think it's what I said earlier on. You know, it's family, it's people, it's fandom, it's coming together. You know, it's enjoying something and having moments when you don't have to enjoy the same thing, and remembering that, and you know, and knowing that no matter what your take on Star Wars, whether you're, you know, just an EU loyalist, whether you're a solely just Disney canon, that there is always going to be something that you will all love. You know, there will always be one part of Star Wars that you can agree on, and to try and focus on what that is, because actually the fun of it is then going, "What, you like that?" and then pulling each other apart for it, but in a way that doesn't mean you literally have to try and pull each other apart to it. You know, you can, you know, being a fan of anything is having those moments of those conversations down the pub or whatever, you know, when you can't quite believe what the other person has said and you have to put them right. But having the respect to know you're putting them right, and it doesn't matter if they don't agree with you or not, because you love the same thing. Yeah. And again, I think that goes back to everything I was saying on about the Jedi earlier on. Yeah. It's that finding those things that you can love as a group, and that you do love as a group, and that join you rather than divide you. I think that's what every fandom, but especially Star Wars, means to me.
What a perfect button. Because that's all our podcast is about, is taking that hate out of the debate of Star Wars and just talking about why everyone loves it from their own point of view. Yeah,
I just every day I despair sometimes at everything that goes on, because I'm just like, as I said, you know, all joking aside, I was bullied when I was a kid because I liked all this stuff. Yeah, we're now in a situation when we bully each other on it, and I'm like, come on, there's no need. No. There's no need for any of this.
I guarantee you all those bullies want your autograph now. But
I mean, that'd be lovely. But at the end of the day, you know, I know that, you know, you do end up going, well, I've won because I still like this stuff. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's the same through all of this. It's just the understanding that you haven't got to be each other's throats, because it's supposed to be fun and it's supposed to bring you together. So yeah, let's just go for that.
And it goes back to what you were saying. It's about removing barriers so that the bad people don't win.
I like that.
Cavan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you? Where do you interact with people the most on social? And what do you have coming up next that people should be on the lookout for?
So from Star Wars, there's the ongoing Marvel comic, The High Republic. We just announced the next audio drama, Tempest Breaker, which is coming out in December, which I'm working on at the minute, which carries on the story of Lorna Dee, the villainous Twi'lek of Phase 1 of the High Republic. Where people can find me, Instagram's probably I used to be all over Twitter, not so much these days. Instagram is probably the place to find me, Cavan Scott Writer. But if you really want to, I think I've pulled back a bit from social media, and the best place is my newsletter, which is cavletter.com, which is a really egotistical title for a newsletter. But I'm owning it. Cavletter.com. I put a couple of newsletters a week for various different reasons. Friends come in and recommend things. I talk about what I'm doing. Nice. That's probably the best place to find me now.
This has been one of my favorite conversations on this pod. I've really enjoyed listening to your creative process and how your life has been poured into this art, and how it's also been, you know, vice versa. And thank you so much. This was lovely.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, Cavan, thank you so much.
Yeah.
May the force be with you.
And with you, for light and light.
For light and light.
We can let you go pick up your kids.
Yeah,
now.
Brilliant.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. That was great. That was really good fun.
Hi, this is Dave, and before we get to the show, I wanted to ask you a favor. One of our goals this year is to grow the show so that What Does Star Wars Mean to You reaches more listeners. And that's where we're asking you for help. And it's really easy. Wherever you listen to us, please hit that subscribe button. If you're liking the show, give us a 5-star rating and review on the platform you listen to us. We make a lot of fun of the algorithm and the smash that button thing, but it really does help us get noticed by new fans. And if you want to join in on the conversation, find us on social at Star Wars Mean to You. That's Star Wars Mean, the number 2 in the letter U. Now, let's chat some Star Wars.